Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the sources you send us, dig into them, and pull out the most interesting, the most crucial insights, really just for you.
And today we're looking at something really fascinating.
Yeah, definitely. It's this idea that places, the spaces around us might actually hold on to some kind of memory, or maybe an emotional energy.
Exactly. We've got some great source material you sent over, excerpts on resonant memory and the subtle architecture of place. Really evocative titles.
They are. And look, I know this whole concept might sound a bit out there at first.
Mm-hmm. A little unconventional, perhaps.
But stick with us, we're going to unpack it. The aim here, our sort of mission for this deep dive, is to explore this idea of a psychic ecology.
Right, to understand what it is according to these texts and maybe how we could become more aware of it.
Yeah, exactly. Without it feeling, overwhelming or too strange. We want to see if it offers a genuinely new way to understand the everyday places we move through.
And it's less about believing in ghosts, more about tuning into subtle layers of reality that maybe we just don't normally notice.
Okay, so let's dive in. This core concept, psychic ecology. What are the texts actually describing there?
So essentially, think of it as the emotional or energetic landscape of an environment. It's not just the physical stuff, the bricks, the trees. It's shaped by everything that's happened there. Events, sure, but also repeated feelings, collective memories, even just patterns of behavior.
So the big idea is environments aren't passive backdrops. They're actively shaped by, and maybe even shape our feelings, like an emotional residue.
Precisely. And it's not just about people. The materials used, the symbolic role of the place, like you mentioned, a library versus a battlefield, they carry different psychic weights.
That makes intuitive sense, actually. So what kind of things build up this ecology? What are the main contributors?
Well, the texts highlight a few key things. Repeated emotional patterns are huge. Think of the feeling in a hospital waiting room, maybe.
Yeah, that low-level anxiety or grief sometimes.
Right. Or historical events, big traumas, or big celebrations, they leave a mark.
Yeah.
But also everyday rituals, commuting patterns, worship, even things like constant surveillance.
Surveillance? How does that fit in?
It creates a particular kind of watchful, maybe tense energy field.
Yeah.
And then there's the architecture itself, its form, its intended function.
Okay.
You even potentially geophysical energies, things like underground water, mineral deposits. Some places just feel different, right?
They do. And how does our modern world, like all this concrete and infrastructure, play into this? Do the sources mention that?
Yeah, they touch on that. The idea is that modern infrastructure can sometimes distort or even saturate these environments. Think of the relentless stress of a busy freeway or the kind of indifference you might feel in a huge anonymous office park.
Creates a kind of psychic static, makes it harder to sense subtler things?
It can, yeah. They call them saturated psychic environments. But importantly, the text suggests that even in these really dense places, there's still potential for understanding, maybe even for shifting the energy.
All right, so there's this landscape, this psychic ecology all around us. How do we actually start to, notice it? The sources talk about field resonance recall. What's that about?
Okay, so field resonance recall. It's described as the ability to perceive that emotional memory of a place, but through empathy, through feeling. It's not about analyzing history books.
So less thinking about the place, more feeling with it. Is that the idea?
That's pretty much it, yeah. They distinguish it from something like psychometry, touching an object to get specific facts. This is broader, more about sensing the overall emotional imprint, the tone of the place.
Can you give some examples? What might that actually feel like?
Sure. Imagine, say, walking into an old abandoned house and getting this sudden wave of melancholy, or maybe forgotten hopes.
Okay.
Or visiting a place known for centuries as sacred ground and feeling this unexpected sense of peace, or maybe even awe. Or even just touching, like the railing of an old bridge and sensing a faint pulse of determination, or maybe nervousness from all the people who've crossed it.
So these aren't just random moods we're having. The idea is we're actually interacting with this memory-saturated field.
That's the concept, yes. The environment communicates, but subtly. Maybe your breathing changes slightly, or your mood shifts for no obvious reason, or you get a sudden intuitive hit.
Requires being open, I guess.
Very much so. Open and receptive.
Which leads nicely into the next idea, environmental empathetic dialogue. Sounds like it goes beyond just passively sensing things.
It does. This is presented as moving into a kind of nonverbal exchange with the place, establishing a reciprocal awareness.
Reciprocal. So it's not just me feeling the place, but the place might somehow register or even respond to my attention.
That's the core of it, yeah. The texts use analogies like how animals seem to sense our emotions, or how an ancient forest might feel like it embodies patience.
Right.
Environments, they suggest, have these emotional qualities we can actually engage with, and maybe even influence a little through our own conscious presence.
Okay, intriguing. So how would someone actually do that? What are the steps for this dialogue?
Well, the sources lay out a kind of process. First step is stillness. Quieting the mental chatter, becoming neutral, open.
Harder than it sounds sometimes.
Definitely. Then comes sensing. Just letting impressions arise, textures, images, raw feelings, without jumping to interpret them.
Just letting it wash over you.
Kind of, yeah. Then the dialogue part. This could be internally asking a question, or maybe offering a feeling like compassion or just acknowledgement, and then observing. Seeing if there's any shift, any sense of response.
And the last step.
Witnessing. Sometimes the text suggests a place doesn't need fixing or analyzing. It just needs its story, its feeling, to be acknowledged without judgment or resistance.
It's interesting they mention places feeling guarded or raw or even eager. Really personifies them.
It does, and it ties back to that cumulative history, what's resonated there over time. But the dialogue isn't always about healing the space. Sometimes it's just about being present with it, maybe achieving a kind of momentary emotional balance together.
So, my calm presence in an agitated space might actually offer a kind of steadying influence.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Like emotional co-regulation, but with a place.
Okay. So, we've tuned in, maybe even had this subtle dialogue. How do we maintain a connection? The texts talk about location linking.
Right, location linking. This is about creating a more persistent, energetic connection, almost like a psychic tether to a place.
A psychic bookmark, maybe.
That's a good way to put it. It lets you mentally or emotionally revisit it, maybe sense how it's changing over time, or even contribute positively to its atmosphere.
How do you create these links? What are the methods?
Several are suggested. Breath work is one, consciously breathing in the feeling of the place, breathing out your own presence or intention into it.
Okay.
Anchoring objects is another, leaving a small, personally meaningful item, like a specific stone or something you've charged with intention, as a resonator.
Like leaving a little piece of your energy there.
Yeah. Sort of, yeah. Visualization is also mentioned, imagining links of light, for instance. And even just naming the field, giving the place's energy a personal name to create a specific memory point in connection.
And these links, they're not permanent, right? They can fade.
That's right. If the place changes dramatically, or if you just stop paying attention to the link, it can weaken.
Yeah.
But for places that really matter to you, maintaining these links is described as a kind of psychic stewardship.
Stewardship. I like that, taking some responsibility for the energetic health of a place.
Exactly. And it's also suggested as a gentle way to support places carrying difficult histories, offering gradual healing energy over time.
This is all building a fascinating picture. The sources also bring in synchronous archetypes. What's that about? Recurring patterns.
Yes, exactly. Synchronous archetypes are these recurring emotional and symbolic patterns that tend to show up in different locations that serve similar functions or hold similar collective experiences. They arise naturally from that shared purpose, the collective emotion, the symbolism, even if the buildings look totally different.
So, like most libraries, maybe. Regardless of architecture, they often have that quiet, studious, slightly watchful feeling.
That's a perfect example. The text lists several. Libraries, compressed thought, quiet surveillance, latent potential, bridges, often feel like energetic thresholds crossing decision, movement. Public restrooms, surprisingly perhaps, described as liminal, vulnerable spaces, often emotionally dense because of the private, sometimes stressed rituals that happen there.
Never thought of it that way, but yeah.
Hotels. Temporary emotional containers holding traces of longing, secrecy, transit hubs in general, hurried tension, anonymity, constant decision making.
Right.
And hospitals.
Yeah.
Very powerful archetypes of liminality, thresholds between life and death, struggle and surrender.
It's quite striking how function seems to create these consistent atmospheres. The sources say recognizing these helps us tap into a global emotional grid.
That's the idea. You start seeing these repeating patterns of human intention and emotion playing out everywhere. And the suggestion is, if you consciously enter that network, say, enter a hospital waiting room with deliberate calm or compassion, You might subtly influence that archetype, that repeating pattern, not just locally, but perhaps on a wider scale.
Wow. Okay, that leads directly to the next concept, coherence work, actively trying to influence the space's tone.
Yes, but subtly. Coherence work, as it's described, isn't about forcing a place to feel good or blasting it with positive energy. It's more gentle.
How so?
It's about offering a stable, harmonious resonance, like a clear musical note that the existing energy field of the place can potentially align with if it resonates.
So less like shouting commands and more like humming a calming tune in a noisy room.
Exactly that. A great analogy. And how do you do it? Well, sometimes just your presence, being there with deep inner stillness, can have an effect. Using your breath consciously, like we mentioned, exhaling calm into a chaotic space. Some people might use subtle tools, crystals, bells, scents, symbols, as anchors for coherence.
Okay.
And there's even this idea of the aikido of emotion, gently redirecting intense emotional waves using visualization or focused non-resistant attention.
So the person doing this work acts like an emotional tuning fork.
That's a perfect description from the text, yes. You offer a point of clear, stable regulation, and the surrounding field might resonate and settle into a more balanced state. You're not forcing, you're offering.
Okay. Putting all these pieces together, the psychic ecology, resonance recall, empathetic dialogue, linking, archetypes, coherence work, it does feel like a different way of seeing. They call it spiritual realism.
Yeah, I like that term. It's acknowledging this web of feeling and memory and story that exists right alongside or maybe underneath the physical world we see. It suggests our experience is shaped just as much by this subtle layer.
So the key takeaway isn't really about escaping reality into some fantasy world.
Not at all. It's about recognizing a deeper, maybe more interconnected dimension of the reality that's already here and how we interact with it all the time, whether we realize it or not.
It's about developing a more holistic understanding of our environment and our place within it.
Definitely. It really makes you pause and think differently about the places you encounter every single day, doesn't it? Your home, your office, the route you take to work.
Yeah, what energies are really there? What stories are held in the walls, in the land itself?
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening.
Hmm.
Think about a place you know really well. Your kitchen, maybe, or a park bench you often sit on.
Okay.
Just try to sense it for a moment. What's the underlying emotional tone it carries for you? Beyond the physical objects, what faint stories or feelings might it be holding?
That's a great prompt, an invitation really to start exploring this subtle architecture of conscious living for yourself.
A fascinating journey to consider. Thanks for digging into this with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you.